Let's tell a little story about a time long ago in a pleasant green land that was inhabited by tribes of a spiritual people who were in touch with the spirits of earth and air and rain and river. They were just on the cusp of switching from a semi-nomadic life of horticulture and hunting to just barely learning on their own how to farm and switch over into agriculture. And had things gone differently, who knows what their own civilizations would have been without interference. But they did get interfered with. One day, boats showed up on their shores, filmed with armed men, with weaponry and armor, the likes of which the native peoples had never seen. And it was the beginning of centuries of struggle, as wave after wave of invaders came to that land. And the natives would try to fight them off, and there would be a big mixture of some tribes would ally with the invaders to get back at old enemies, because it's not like these natives, like in modern times, we like to portray them as being very peaceful mystics, very in tune with nature, but they were still humans themselves and were prone to doing weird things like painting themselves up with war paint. And though their weapons were more primitive, they were still perfectly capable of killing people. And they had numbers and tenacity, and so it was a struggle for a long time. Hell, even after the initial invasive force started having problems back in their own homeland and kind of had to give up on the colonial project, other powers neighboring that original people would come over the water and kind of dropped the pretense of just coming purely just to like try to find gold and metal and stuff like that. They're just coming to take land and settle it and farm it. And then more people coming to reap profit off that, and other people coming to try to find religious conversion amongst these populations. And there was periods of time where various large nations were vying with each other for control over chunks of this land, until that polyglot of people who had emerged, that were a mixture of this small core group of people who actually were truly native to the land and who had been kind of bred into just a mixture of various invading forces. They, on the surface, they all kind of looked similar because they're all neighbors, but they were themselves, considered themselves very different peoples and didn't necessarily mesh in language. But they all finally just kind of, as one, got together and kind of formed their own identity and shoved control from off their land. They're like, fuck you people. No, this is our shit. We're controlling it ourselves. And so they became their own independent force and eventually became quite a world power of their own over time, and including inflicting similar things on other people. And I'm, of course, talking about England. What happened in the Americas was not really even a genocide or any of the broad stroke recasting a history to create narratives that are convenient for political gain. I mean, what I just did by telling England's origins in such a way, it's not like it's necessarily false, but man, it sweeps over a whole lot of nuance and detail now, doesn't it? But there's echoes, because that is the natural process of when civilizations overwhelm each other. There's been concentric waves emerging out of Central Asia for like 10,000 years of civilization, crashing into other peoples, bowling them over, but then over time, those peoples kind of internalize it and make it their own, and then they spread out, and then they spread out and collapse, spread out and collapse, spread out and collapse, spread out and collapse. And about the only places where they run into lands where they're not able to repeat that pattern are lands that have already undergone that same civilizing process. I bring this all up, of course, because of the Elizabeth Warren DNA revelations and how I guess you're stuck with if you're on the left, you either have to now reject Elizabeth Warren as being a lying cultural appropriator, or you have to accept her as Native American, in which case, statistically speaking, pretty much everyone on this continent whose family's been here for a couple of generations has had enough time for someone to have bred with someone to give you a little bit of tiny droplet of Native American ancestry yourself. So I guess we all get to be Native Americans now, which has been the case anyway. I don't really understand why it is that 600 years isn't long enough an occupation time for you can say that you belong somewhere. Exactly what is the cutoff line? 2,000 years? I mean, what is the proposal? Are we going to take it at a fixed point in history and then try to shove everybody around on the earth back into their original positions? That's just not even possible because of how certain populations have bloomed. You'd be trying to cram gigantic groups into areas that they just won't fit in anymore. And then you'll be left with big, massive chunks of land without anyone to occupy it, leaving it open to just repeat the whole invasion process again, because this is just a thing humans do. We reach a certain saturation level, and either we're forced to internalize and start slaughtering each other, or we move out. It's kind of the horrible trap we've kind of painted ourselves into in a way with our viewpoints on war and human killing. Because now we've made it morally unacceptable to do certain things to external populations, and so all we have left is destroying ourselves because there's too many of us. We'll pass the saturation point. There's no answer here.